Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include Visigothic fonts, touristy cheese, and a powerful conversation on our place in the universe. All this and more on this episode of Created Things.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's installment of Created Things. I'm your host, Father Gabriel Tretta, Dominican priest and theological aesthetician, and with me is also my host, Jacob Flores Popchek, artist, psychotherapist. And we have for you tonight what I hope is the world's only podcast brought to you by the letter Visigoth. How you doing?
Every single time you open this, it gets weirder. And I love it so.
I don't know what to tell you, Jacob. This is like the best I can get.
The superlatives get more superlative-y. The intro, the starting prompt gets more insane. I can't even begin to dissect the questions you ask in these intros, and I love it.
This is how you know that I'm starting to be a little bit more comfortable, because if I'm speaking with more and more absurd hyperbole and superlatives and making less and less sense, I hate to say it, but you're looking at more and more of the real me.
I'm here for it. There's a real kind of like Mad Tea Party vibe. I'll peel back the curtain for the listener a little bit. You know, we try to take turns on who's going to intro these things, but we don't tell the other one what we're going to intro with. And just in case you forget when it's your turn, I always try to come up with my own. So I was going to sort of open this.
Oh, smart.
Per the topic, I was going to kind of open this saying, you know, the only podcast where you, the listener, get to choose which of us is Don Quixote and which of us is Sancho Panza, because I'm very like thematic that way.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Talking about all things Spain today. But I like the nonsense of yours so much better.
Oh my gosh. See, no, but this is the whole point, because you and gentle listener both may not know that most of what I want to say about Spain is actually about the Visigoths.
Oh God, this is going to be a terrible episode.
This is going to be one of those episodes where like, hey, it's Spain. Let's talk about like, I don't know, La Sagrada Familia. And I'm all like, yeah, let's talk about the Visigoths, which is what most people do when they talk about Spain.
Sure. Definitely not tapas or sangria.
No, absolutely. What are you talking about?
Lisping.
No, yeah, lisping. Exactly. There's this amazing Dominican I know who's a Dominican here in America, but he is from.
Oh, really?
He's from Spain. Like his family he was born in Spain, and he came to America as like a 10-year-old or something.
Right.
And he was like filling me in on all this kind of awesome stuff about like, hey, if you go to Spain, like here's some things that we should do. But the hilarious thing is like, because of the studies that I do, CF Supra, theological aesthetician, I spend a lot of time with like 6th, 7th, 8th century Spain, where everyone be a Visigoth.
Right.
And it turns out that like if you are a contemporary Spaniard, like 6th, 7th, 8th century Spain is not your like go-to sense of like what it means to be Spanish, which is
exactly
weird.
The foundation of your cultural identity. Yeah.
Yeah, weird, right? Because like that is my go-to sense of what it means to be Spanish. So like I don't know. I just feel like we're at a impasse. Contretemps.
Well, yeah, we're in impasse because I don't know anything about 8th century Visigoths.
You don't need to.
I have toured around many of the areas of Spain that you recently were at. Basically, that's the point of this episode, y'all. So Father Gabriel, our dear Father Gabriel, theological anesthetician.
Aesthetician, not anesthetician. I cannot make you go to sleep. Actually, I can also make you go to sleep.
Haha, you catch my clever pun.
Oh my gosh. He just made a pun.
There you go, and a pun for smart people, which is the douchiest kind.
That is, I respect that.
Yeah. So anyway, I've been around Spain, but Father Gabriel just got back from a retreat around Spain, and Spain's a very cool place. He saw a lot of cool art stuff, a lot of cool faith stuff, all very much in the wheelhouse of this episode. And it's also a place that was very influential on me when I went there as a young lad, artistically and spiritually. Kind of set me on a weird path. So a good path, but a weird path to where I am weird and cool now. So I thought it'd be fun to just do kind of a deconstructionist episode and not, play too hard and fast and just literally, that thing that like our dads used to do in presumably like any time before the 90s back to the 1600s where they get back from a trip and they'd show you like a slideshow.
Yes,
like they get
exactly.
everybody together. I
my
think
gosh.
this is the
17th
audio
century
version
magic
of
lantern.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Just
yes.
Like a dad just getting his neighbors together and like, let me show you our trip to Las Cruces.
Oh, and this is my feet. I was checking to make sure that this worked. But look, I'm wearing sandals because I'm on vacation.
It's vacation. Isn't that what they did in the VeggieTales Zebu song? He's like going through like a slideshow of his vacation stills, and then it becomes this really Lynchian depiction of Zebus.
Okay, I don't know what Zebus is, and I confess my knowledge of VeggieTales is basically nothing.
What?
I know. I watched like their version of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
which is a classic. Yeah. Rack, Shack, and Benny.
Yeah, that's it. Which I admit it's pretty clever. But that's most of what I know about them. So,
oh man,
I know.
I was considering before I asked you to do this podcast. I was considering doing a podcast with another friend that we just don't have time for. I don't have time for 2 podcasts. I'm only human, but I really wanted to do a VeggieTales podcast called Pod Made You Special, where me and my buddy went in and just because the whole point of VeggieTales are very moralistic, right?
Right.
And they have some moral takeaway at the end. But as adults, you take away very different morality from these episodes. For instance, the Christmas special is extremely anarcho-socialist.
Oh
like
my gosh, that's exciting.
Very, very sees the means of production.
Yes.
And I just would love to do episodes like, what did we learn from this episode, and go through. But that will have to be for another lifetime because I just don't have the time.
That's good. Bold. This is also the reveal moment where everyone discovers that you believe in reincarnation, which is cool. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
I believe in reincarnation, Zebus, and theological anesthetization.
Exactly. All of the above, which I respect. That seems perfectly reasonable. Yeah. So this podcast is in a real way brought to you by the fact that like back in October or something, I found a flight to Spain for $300. And I thought to myself, listen, I need to take an annual retreat. Side note, priests are obliged to take an annual retreat. Which is totally amazing. It's like being obliged to do the one thing that you want to do anyway. It's incredible. But it's like, I need to take a retreat anyway. And I was like, I mean, it's pretty easy for me to spend $300 just like buying a flight to visit my family. So like, what if I just spent that? Like, basically anywhere I go for a retreat is going to cost me that much money. So I was like, why not just go to Spain and like do my retreat in Spain, which is what I did. Which is delightful, of course, because I do speak some European languages, but I do not, however, speak Spanish. So that was all fantastic. Don't worry, I do have fatal allergies that like I can't just like go into a shop and just eat whatever shows up because it will straight up kill me. So that always makes traveling to a place where I don't know the language like an extra special bucket of fun. But anyway, I thought so like I spend most of the retreat in Seville, which is amazing. And
famous for its barbers.
For its barbers. Also famous for apparently having the body of Christopher Columbus, which I did not know. Yeah, it's in the cathedral. Who knew? Got to see all kinds of awesome things like all over, and just like spent tons of time in prayer. And like I had this basic routine where I would just like show up to a city, because I took a lot of day trips and stuff. I just like show up to a city, spend like hours and hours and hours in their cathedral, just praying and seeing the beautiful things, and just jiving out on the life of the church in Spain, like past and present, and then like whatever, sit in the sun and like eat manchego and things like that, which is pretty much. Yeah, I know it's it is rough on your heart, but it's good. Don't worry.
This is very eat, pray, love of you, Father.
Oh my God. gosh, Jacob, you sunk my battleship. It is me, pray love.
I'm just imagining you sort of wandering down the streets, and there's just some kind of like acoustic guitar playing behind you.
Bloop, 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 bloop. I mean, I was surprised at how cheap it was to hire somebody to play the acoustic guitar behind me the whole time. So what could I do? I couldn't afford not to. It was so affordable. It was like the flight itself.
You charge it to the order, and you're just like, this is part of the retreat.
This is part of the retreat. I needed it. I needed Sufjan Stevens to just be like walking behind me the whole time. I needed it. So it's like me and Steve Zissou.
The meaning of love. Just the whole time you're there.
That's exactly right. So, but obviously, like, I don't want to like just talk about like, hey, here are some cool things in Spain. Like, I thought that it would be fun to focus, since we both been there and we both were really taken by what we saw there at very different times in our life. I really wanted to talk about Toledo.
Oh God, yeah.
And specifically the Cathedral of Toledo. Again, I want to beg everyone's indulgence. I said at the beginning, I don't speak Spanish. I figure like I'm doing a big win here by not pronouncing it Toledo, and that's all I got. That's all I got. So, but okay, so I was in Toledo like a couple weeks ago, but you have been to Toledo, which which you are encyclopedic mega fans who exist,
Maybe.
bold claim, exist, will remember, because you have once shown your Toledo steel sword, which the attentive observer may even be able to observe now, but probably not, because it's going to be cropped out. But I want to hear about this trip. So like, I know that you were there. I know that you were one of these bros who like went abroad and bought a sword, which is like a thing. But like, tell me more. Like, when were you there? What were you doing? Like,
so
what did
I
you
was
do?
there. When was I there? I was there summer of 2011.
Okay.
So this is a hot minute ago. This was right before I entered college. So like my freshman summer. And it's actually interesting because it does sort of pertain to the theme of the podcast. This is back when I still wanted to be a filmmaker when I grew up, which I abandoned because after I went to the New York Film Academy briefly, and I worked several movie sets, independent movie sets, and decided that like every single person that I was meeting on that level of filmmaking was a complete like demonstrable asshole. And I just hate, I loved the idea of the storytelling, and I loved the idea of, the craft, but I just kind of hated the culture around it. And so I ended up pivoting out of filmmaking and into, what I'm doing now with art. But this was sort of the apex of that time in my life. And I had entered into a film festival competition where you would make a little sort of Catholic short film, and it would be shown at a World Youth Day Film Festival in Madrid. And I won one of the slots. There were people from like different states and other countries who were represented, but I was one of the people. And they flew me out and they put me in a room with a very weird person. And I proceeded to have a very, very, very weird time because this was sort of a weird apex time for young Jakey, because this was like sort of the height of my scrupulosity as a person.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But also the height of my growing increasingly tired of other scrupulous people. So I kind of see this as the time, not to be gross, but I kind of see this as the time where the sort of spiritual cyst popped, where I was like, I can't take this anymore. This is awful. And there were like two.
That's actually pretty legit. Yeah, I respect that.
There was two Protestants on the trip who had like entered kind of accidentally and won, which says a lot about the quality of the filmmakers in the competition. And I ended up just like slumming it with them most of the time, because there were all these sort of, cult of Marianism people who just kept, reading signs and everything. And, oh, the wind is a sign, and the cracker is a sign, and the leaf is a sign, and it was awful. So I was just like, I can't hack it with these people. Like, all loved these people. I just can't take it. So I ended up slumming it with the Protestant kids for the whole time. And we like kept stealing away to do karaoke at this one authentically Japanese karaoke bar in like this ghetto of Madrid. So all the owners are speaking Spanish with a thick Japanese accent.
Yes.
And it was also frequented by the very kind of like sexy, cool French kids from World Youth Day. So there was this like very like just too cool girl smoking like a loose cigarette underneath a streetlight. No kidding. Outside, she's French. And she's like, "You sing very well." And I'm like, "I don't, but thank you." And that was how I spent a lot of my nights in Spain. But I did.
That seems reasonable. Yeah.
I did manage to go to Avila to see the tomb of Teresa of Avila, which was a very formative and interesting experience for me. Because again, I was very scrupulous at this time. And if you know anything about Teresa of Avila, it's real hard to stay scrupulous after you encounter Teresa of Avila.
Oh, wow.
And,
cool.
And then got to go to Toledo, which was just one of the coolest things ever. And to kind of set the scene, I mean, I know this is a very ugly American thing to say, because it's completely the wrong part of the world. But Toledo is sort of the Spanish equivalent of the Italian town you see in a pasta commercial. It's sort of this beautiful medieval town built up the side of a mountain with a single, 1,000-year-old bridge leaning into it, and a castle-like cathedral on the very top of the mountain, and these winding cobblestone streets, and people shouting at each other with their hands, and you got to press yourself up against a wall as the car drives down, and all the food is miraculously delicious, and the faith is really vibrant, and there are about 150 different stores where you can buy swords, and it's just everything an American wants Spain to be, in about a 5-mile radius.
Yeah, it is teeny tiny. That's the other, I mean, the old town, right? Like a lot of places. But it's true, because so you like go up this mountain and then you are just like, which feels very Citadel like, for all kinds of reasons, and it's quite steep actually. Like you're really hypothetically speaking, if you had recently had COVID, you'd be kind of panting as you climb up these.
Not something you relate to for sure, but just
no. I'm just saying, like, what if you had COVID 2011?
Right.
Yeah, like it's but exactly right. It's somehow this kind of fantasy thing, and to the extent of like feeling unreal while being real, that sort of weird vibe you get from like places that are very touristy and know it, so like so Toledo, of course, like famous for its steel, for its swords, right, from like back in the day, as like anybody who's ever watched Bugs Bunny cartoons can tell you, famous enough, like a staple enough in American consciousness that like Bugs Bunny can make jokes about Toledo steel, because everyone knows that like Toledo steel is going to be the best
Bugs Bunny,
right?
Or famously in the terrible 80s Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, Alan Rickman plays the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he orders all the swords, and they're fine Spanish steel, and that's what he's referencing there as well. So,
oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That's amazing. I have not seen it because I have bad taste, but not in that particular way.
Right.
But yeah, no, exactly. So like, so this is a real thing. I mean, again, like how many sword makers are there in Toledo at this point? I don't really know, but like, because I mean, it really is this town. I mean, people really live there, and like it's just exactly what you say. But then also because they get a lot of tourists. I mean, like even in mega COVID time, like there were a fair amount of tourists. So you have all of these shops, and you can tell these like geological layers in the tourist shops, because so all around like the kernel of the old city, which is the cathedral, you have all of these shops selling like swords and sword annexed items, which of course means a bunch of Lord of the Rings stuff. So you can buy like Chinese-made Lord of the Rings sword-themed products in Toledo, right? But
that's so cringe.
Which is amazing. It's incredible. But then the more, and some of which actually you can tell predates the films, in fact. Some of which does, and most of it doesn't, but some of it you can tell. That's why I say it's like geological layers, because you can tell that some of this predates the films, just because you think like, oh, medieval stuff, swords, medieval stuff, medieval towny thing, ergo Lord of the Rings, and then it's like ergo movies. But then most cringy is that there's this like newest layer of sediment, and I do mean sediment, which is Game of Thrones.
Ooh.
Like, come to Toledo, see the cathedral, buy yourself some Game of Thrones swordy, stabby, daggery collector's sets, also made in China, but you bought them in Toledo. It's amazing.
That's an ouch. That's an ouch and
Yeah.
an oof. I will say in
Yeah.
my defense, I mean, now look, I was a freshman in college, so it's not like I was the height of elegance or anything like that. But I will say I looked very closely for a sword that had actually been made there. So I will defend myself by saying
Oh, yeah.
my sword was actually, and it has the little official state seal and everything. It's not a Chinese sword. This is although I had one of those too and was briefly arrested for it. But
Nope.
that's another story for another time. The Spanish sword though, definitely authentically Toledoan? Toledean? I don't
All
know.
of the above.
From Toledo.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, yeah, no, but exactly. It is amazing, you know. Yeah, I've not been. People complain a lot about like people from Venice. I mean, I should say, I have read many articles quoting people from Venice complaining about how like they feel like their own city is just like a theme park version
Mhm.
of their own city, but it is also actually their only city. And that like that can
Right.
feel sort of weird, right? That sort of like meta reflection of like what are we in fact. And Toledo was not like that dramatic, mercifully, but just this one particular layer of existence in the city was just sort of wild and really delightful. And knowing that in, again, no judgment, like in different circumstances, knowing that in different circumstances, you had bought one of these swords, made the whole thing so much more delightful for me.
Oh, I'm
Not a
sure it did.
joke. I was thinking about you the whole time. It was so much fun.
Aw, buddy, thank you. I will say this maybe deserves a topic for a whole episode, but this is something we keep coming back to in different ways, whether it's in our Christmas conversations or whether it's our Halloween conversations or any of those like more kitschy based conversations. I think it's this phenomenon of a place or a thing being ostensibly fake, but then eventually becoming what it pretends to be, but for real, is so fascinating. And it's even more fascinating when you apply it to a city like Venice or Toledo, or even, my wife's family is from Albuquerque. And so that's very close to Santa Fe. So we would go up to Santa Fe whenever we're down there. Santa Fe, beautiful. I mean, it's like Whoville via Mexico. I mean, there's not a straight line in the place. It's all, the sloping adobe and the Spanish roofs and the turquoise doors, and it's gorgeous. And you feel like, wow, this is so authentic, except it's not. It was built in the late 1800s and early 1900s to represent what they thought the ideal Mexican town would look like, exclusively to draw tourism.
That's amazing. Wow, it's like a late 19th century tourist trap.
Yeah, exactly. But
Isn't that
has become
fascinating?
what it pretended to be,
Yeah.
because there actually are these incredible Hispanic traditions alive and well there, incredible Navajo and Pueblo Indian traditions alive and well there, Catholic religious traditions, the what's it called? The St. Francis Cathedral is there, and then also nearby, not exactly there, but nearby is the classic like St. Joseph stairs. The miraculous St. Joseph stairs are near there. So, it is what it claims to be, but started out fake, and then Venice started out real, and then is fake, but then is also real, and then Toledo is the same way. And I love that so much. There's this like velveteen rabbit, which I've referenced before, but also a pseudo-sacramental kind of a thing. Like we describe the sacraments in Catholicism and say they are what they represent, right? The water of baptism is what it represents. It is water, but it also like represents, the healing power of water, et cetera, and so forth. And I feel like there's something of that to places like these, and they're very magical to me.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really fair point. And I confess, like, something that I find really fascinating about being in a place like that is the way that um it also exists for you in like one can take that offer, to say like, yeah, I'm gonna go buy the Game of Thrones collector set of daggers. And then I'm gonna go right next door to it to the like authentic Spanish ham store and like and do this, and then I'm gonna like you just kind of hit the run of these things, and then I'm gonna like
carve my ham with the daggers from Game of Thrones.
Of course, yeah, obviously, and like you do all of the above, or you can, so which is to say that like a city, it's just like a funny idea, like a city can propose itself to you as a product to be consumed in like one very specific way, which of course is shaped by like the desires of the people who visit it, right? So this is like dialogic thing where the tourist shops are responding to their perception of desire, but they also shape the desire by what they're willing to offer and how they offer it and all these things. Okay, so like that's all really fascinating. Which I want to be kind of. I mean, like the movement of my heart is to be snooty about that, of course.
Sure, yeah. That's the easy
but at the
choice.
same time, if you don't know anything about Toledo and you are not like a person who's motivated by like historical interest and these kinds of things, then like, you know what? Like your sword might not be like the most authentic sword, but you did buy a sword in Toledo, and like the ham that you buy might not be the best ham in town, but like you did buy some pretty good ham, because even if it's like kind of cheap tourist ham, it's still probably gonna be better than anything that you had from like the grocery store or whatever. And you know what I mean? Like even though
and I would argue a step further, as I always do, that I think even if you buy the cheap version, you're still participating in a grand and sacred tradition. I mean, it's not like every medieval peasant who went to Toledo was buying the best quality ham or the best quality fake relic or the best quality metal or whatever it was.
Fair.
They were like part of tourism and part of pilgrimage has always been this sort of pseudo-sacramental exchange with the profoundly shitty.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point.
And I think it's cool that like by going to a place like that, I mean, a lot of snooty stuff can be said about tourists, and perhaps rightfully so. But I do think one of the really cool things about tourists is if you go to a place like that, you are now part of the story of that place. Not a big part of that story, maybe, but there have been thousands and thousands of pilgrims before you, and you're now one of them on a list somewhere doing the same dumb things and buying the same overpriced mimic of a thing that your great ancestors were buying during the Second Crusade. And I think that's kind of awesome, because that's again another example of a fake thing sort of willing itself into reality over the course of the centuries.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like there is a lot to that. There's a lot to that. And I don't know. It just like for me, I feeling like my visit there really was a pilgrimage, partly because it was I was there really on retreat, and I wanted that, and mercifully I think I received the experience that way, to be not just kind of like tourism per se, but really like a pilgrimage, peripatetic kind of journeying through like holy sites in Spain. And like I don't know, it was you know me well enough, and our listeners have probably pick this up. I do have a very strong tendency to be like too good for X, Y, and Z, and be very proud about myself. That's right, it's true, you are being sort of like proud of myself for doing X, Y, and Z in a way that like the hoi polloi wouldn't, or whatever, which is not good. It's just hubris, pride, but I felt like this, it was great, like particularly in the cathedral itself. I felt like I had a really privileged experience of like basically being like the weirdest like homeless pilgrim there.
Interesting.
And it was awesome. Like it was so great that like it was good for my humility. Even it's just like, yeah, no, I'm not going to pretend that like I'm better than any of these people or whatever. I'm just like this weird I'm like the weird dude who just can't leave the building, you know. I was there for hours and hours and hours and hours. I just like couldn't tear myself away. It was just one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life. Um, I like didn't bring a heavy enough coat because I'm an idiot, and so I was just like shaking with cold in this because of course it's like this gigantic Gothic structure, so it never gets warm. I was like shaking with cold, but just for hours, just gorgeous, you know, just like stuck in a way, which is I think a beautiful. You know, there's these beautiful stories all through Christian history of like people who will go and uh you know, people who are looking for healing would often spend the night in a church with a holy relic, you know, like if they wanted to beseech, you know, St. Dominic's intercession,
Hmm.
they might spend the night in the church, sleeping, you know, in front of his tomb, or you know, resting their head on his relics or something like that. And sometimes this would last in some times and places in the church. This could last for a long time. Like somebody would just basically live in the church for like a year, just
Oh
with
wow.
their physical presence just being a petition for healing or whatever it might be. Um, which is really sort of a wild and powerful thing. And I don't know, I just kind of felt like that was my experience of the Toledo Cathedral. Like I had heard that it was a beautiful space, which it is, and there were specific things I knew about it that I was excited to see. But I think what I wasn't expecting was that kind of like um, sense of just coming to the space as like a petitioner who just wasn't going to leave until somehow it seemed right,
Mm,
which turned out to be like much farther away from my start point than I expected it to be.
that's really profound. That's really. I don't want to put you on the spot by asking what you were trying to petition per se, but I do want to understand better at the very least what that emotional experience was. I mean, how does that you go in with one position, with one demeanor, with one perspective, and you know you're coming in as a student, as an academic, as a faith leader in your own right, and these different you know personas and hats that you're wearing with you know preconceived notions of what you're going to see. At what point does this much more humbling, sort of existentially weird hat fall on you, and do you like start to take notice of it in that experience?
You know, it was pretty close to record right away when I got there, because like so I showed up, you know, and I first, you know, the Toledo Cathedral, mercifully I think that's part of what's so powerful about it. It's a functioning house of worship. You know, it's
Right.
not a museum. Like it's a real place where Christians go to pray. And like I guess the I think one of the bishops recently died, or an auxiliary bishop, or something. I wasn't exactly sure. And so like, but you know, they were getting ready for like a big funeral, and there were like wreaths everywhere. I mean, like it was a, you know, I mean, it's a place where people come to pray. And but there is like a lot of these big cathedrals and stuff. There's to walk through most of it, you pay a little fee. But there's always a space where you can go, you know, like a mass chapel or a Eucharistic chapel where you can just go and pray, right, for free, right, always. So I went to the Eucharistic chapel first and like caught a little like the end. I had said mass that day, of course, but sort of caught the end of a mass, which was just beautiful, just being able to pray and like sort of enter into being in that space by like unexpectedly finding myself in the middle of mass, you know, which was a beautiful thing. And I left at one point, and I walked out, and I looked up, and I saw that, you know, the side entrance that I used had this like gigantic, you know, gorgeous, classic kind of early 13th century um arch, you know, with all of the sculpture, sort of like bas relief sculpture, all over it, and these, you know, all those like different tiers and stuff. Um, and it was like really powerful. It's like, oh wow, that's amazing. And then I turned around and just like started walking away, because I with this sort of unconscious thought in my head, like, oh yeah, well, I know that's really beautiful, but like I got a lot of stuff to see, and like, you know, I'm just gonna go on to the next thing. Um, and then, you know, I think it was just it was a movement of the Holy Spirit, which I just like froze and turned around and was like, bro, you're here as a pilgrim. Like this is your retreat. You know, like you don't have anywhere to go. You don't have anything else to see. Like you came here to like pray in this space and pray with this space. So like stop and look, you know? And it was a powerful experience just because, you know, those kinds of like big arches and things, you know, they just have dozens of images and stuff. And so I think even when I see photographs of them and have all the leisure time in the world to look at them, and then, you know, also when you see them in person, I think my eye and my heart just like tends to kind of gloss over, you know, be like, oh yeah, lots of stuff. Oh man, yeah, beautiful. Wow, cool. Wow, style. You know, like maybe catch a little bit of the style, catch a little bit of like some details or whatever that catch my attention, and then walk away. You know, so to just like suddenly be caught short in the middle of doing a kind of normal sort of like, okay, tourist, like move kind of thing. It was very powerful, you know, and then I just spent like half an hour just like standing in the cold, staring at a wall. And I would say like for me, like it began there. Like that's where it began to be not a coming to see and take photographs and like you know, have something to tell my friends and whatever, and it became just like a being and a beholding, you know.
Yeah, a presence.
Just like a presence, you know, just being there.
I love the way you said that a minute ago, where you say I was praying in the space, I was praying with the space. I mean, I think there are many places where people can have that experience, where people perhaps have had that experience. But I find it really beautiful that you describe it that way, because that was the experience I had there as well.
Wow.
Specifically, it was the first time I had that experience in Spain, because I was, again, there for World Youth Day, and they're, you know, screaming sort of. I mean, look, I got nothing against World Youth Day. Objectively, personally, not a fan. I mean, it's like if you it's like have a music festival, but all the music is bad and none of the people are attractive. Like that's what World Youth Day is. So, you know, everyone's just running around screaming and chanting, and all through Madrid, that's the case. And then all through Avila, that is the case. And then one of us says, oh, let's take the train over to Toledo. And it was just quiet for the first time. And I felt like the Grinch a little bit, just, you know, all the noise. But I walked in this space, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if memory serves, I think this is the case, like a certain number, if not all, of their previous bishops are entombed in the walls of the cathedral.
I wouldn't be, I didn't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised, because there's this very beautiful chapter room, which is basically like the decadent, declined contemporary equivalent is like the bishop's executive boardroom, which is, so, you know, it would be where the bishop would meet with the canons of the cathedral, so the priests of the cathedral, and, you know, conduct business and pray and do all those kinds of things. But it's a business room, you know. So there's the chapter room there is really breathtaking. It's one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, and it has this feature which I've never seen anywhere else, which is that all the bishops of Toledo, for whom they have like names basically from the beginning, like from Eugenius, the first bishop of Toledo, they have portraits of going around in order.
Yes, but then in a separate space, again, if memory serves, because it's been since 2011, but I think I have very clear memory of this, and I think I have photos of this too that now I want to go dig up to make sure I'm not, you know, gaslighting myself. But literally, you know, sort of sarcophagi, stone edifices of each of the bishops sort of stacked up along the wall with each buried entombed inside of it.
That's so cool.
And so when you say you're praying with the space, you are praying with the space. and I don't mean to imply that that's not the case for other parishes. I mean, my parish growing up was 100 years old and built by little Italian immigrants in the steel mill, and those bricks represented the prayers of my ancestors in this parish. So to some degree, that's the beauty, one of the many beauties of any Catholic faith experiences. You aren't just praying in the space, you are praying with the space. But God, when 500, 600 years of a place's clergy are buried in the walls of the place, that they're a permanent part of the edifice of the place, it's hard not to feel that more acutely, that you are literally praying with the space, and that the space is with you, and that you are a part of the space now. I mean, in the same way I was saying before, you're a part of the story of the city. You are a part of the musculature, the organism that is this living, breathing, conscious building.
That's exactly right. And just like being able to kind of jump into that and just have it kind of come to be around you, it's this powerfully immersive reality, but you said, like, say some 500 years plus, but I think that was one of the more, so I would say the for me personally, like, the single most profound experience of being in the Toledo Cathedral was also, like, absolutely the most, like, history nerdy thing, where I was so glad. I mean, I'm a very social person, but I was so glad nobody else was with me, because, like, this is, like, psychopath level, like, weird is what I mean, like, weird pilgrim, like, possibly not very holy, but definitely very foolish, like, weirdo stuff, so they're not even very visible when I was there, because it was, like, mostly blocked out by a bunch of it's not a very important part of the cathedral, and it was kind of, like, surrounded by a bunch of wreaths for this ecclesiastic who had recently passed, but there is, in this fairly unassuming part of the cathedral, this small pillar that's, I don't know, maybe 4 feet tall or something. It's on a pedestal, so the hole is maybe 7-8 feet tall, something like that, and it's just this very unassuming kind of pillar, designed to be freestanding, that has a kind of sphere on the top of it. And what it is it was discovered in the 16th century, and it had a Visigothic inscription on it, and by that I mean, like, an inscription written in the language Visigothic, that is no longer legible, unfortunately, but mercifully, the guys who found it in the 16th century could still read it. And I am actually a little bit surprised to know that knowledge of Visigothic had not been lost at that point, but they translated it into Latin, and so on the base of the plinth is a Latin translation of what the Visigothic said, but that you can't really make out anymore. But what it says is that this pillar was erected when this cathedral was first dedicated in honor of Saint Mary by King Recared in 587.
Oh my God.
And this, like, I sat and stared at that pillar for, I don't know, like, an hour. This is what I mean when I say this cathedral, this podcast is brought to you by the letter V is for Visigoth, because this is the period that I know a fair amount about, and King Recared was a Arian Visigothic. The Visigoths had come to Spain in, like, 416 or so, and had controlled it basically for the rest of the period. King Recared is this interesting figure who, in 587, is himself converts and is baptized, like, because they're Arian Christians, right? So they don't believe. I'm sorry, what that term means is that it's strange, because they would have always called themselves Christians, but they did not believe that Jesus Christ is God in the same way that God the Father is God.
Right. They
And
were
that can be,
considered at the time, and still Arianism would have been considered a heresy.
yeah, it's a heresy, right? So like, I don't know how that could come in more and less dramatic forms. Often with the Gothic peoples, it could take more dramatic forms. So I don't know how dramatic it was in by, you say, mid 6th century Spain. But in any case, so there's this a moment where Recared becomes, you know, a Christian, right? And so he's baptized, because you have to be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So he's baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then starts building on this space a cathedral to Saint Mary, to the Virgin Mary. And what just blew me away about it was like, so in 589 is the Third Council of Toledo, which is one of the more important church events in the Iberian Peninsula. And it's where, so Recared had just converted in 587, and then he starts building this cathedral. But then in 589, he and the saintly bishop of Toledo make all of Spain now Christian. So they're no longer Arian Christian. They're no longer like asterisk footnote Christian. They're Christian. So like this moment, 589, is this absolutely central turning point. Like it is as important in the history of Spain as like 711, which is when the Muslims came. It's this major event. It's probably bigger, really. And in a very real way, like the filioque crisis, or the filioque concept,
Which define.
I'll define that in just one moment, but
Okay.
like in a very real way, that comes from that pillar. So what I mean by that is,
shit.
yeah, which is really crazy. So the word filioque, it means end through the Son, and and from the Son, and it's a phrase that gets added to the Apostles' Creed, or excuse me, to the Nicene Creed, at one point. So if somebody's been to a Catholic church, or actually, as far as I'm aware, even Protestant churches in America that say the creed, like the Presbyterian church I grew up in, they will use this phrase. They'll say that I believe in the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. That phrase, and the Son, that's in Latin. That's just kind of one word with an enclitic, filioque. This doesn't get accepted in the Greek-speaking parts of the church, and then there's a certain period in time where it becomes a major source of conflict in the 9th century, and then the 10th century, and then especially the 11th century, and now it's it can, in some circles, it's a sort of a neuralgic issue of like division between the Greek-speaking parts of the church and then the Latin-speaking parts of the church, that the Latin-speaking parts of the church use this phrase inserted, they say, by their own authority, this phrase into the creed, which was not justified which didn't happen in the Council of Nicaea, didn't happen in the Council of Constantinople. And so like the Greek-speaking parts of the church are often very hesitant about this, and sometimes it's more polemical than it is real, but it can be, anyway, it's a sticky issue now for the unity of the church. But there's a real way in which this, at the time, innocuous little phrase, which was to have this gigantic future history, started from this pillar, because Spain had been Arian, right? So they didn't believe that the Son was God in the same way that God the Father was God.
Right.
In the Third Council of Toledo in 589, which again I think happened in that space.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you're just looking there, like it's here. I mean, of course, that church, that structure doesn't survive. Nothing of it survives except for this pillar. But like, but still, it's this physical space, and Um, so, uh, to really emphasize for the people of Spain that Jesus Christ is God in the same way that God the Father is God, they added this accentuating phrase to the creed that um, God the Father and God the Son in the same way pour out the Holy Spirit. That these are three persons who are totally equal, that
Mm-hmm.
there's no subordination between them, that it's not like God the Father is really God and the Son and the Holy Spirit are kind of like bargain basement Kmart versions of God, but that they're like all the same. And so they insert this phrase to make it, and they start to say it at Mass, to make this really clear, so that
Mm-hmm.
every time somebody's saying this, they are reminded of this fact, which they didn't used to believe, but they now, it's proposed to their belief that Jesus Christ is God in the same way that God the Father is God. And then there's this like big long history about how it goes east, like it goes into the rest of Europe from there, and then from there eventually by the 9th century starts to cause some conflict. But it starts out as this, it starts out there, like literally there, like in this space at this pillar with these people who are like proposing this not because they want to like make this bone of contention that's going to like split the church and, you know, whatever, all this stuff, but because out of their love for their people, you know,
Yeah.
because they know that the people are going to have a hard time. I mean, because it's a weird idea, right? That like a bunch of dudes, and I assure you it was a bunch of dudes, sitting around in this space on the top of a mountain in Toledo, like one day in 589, just like declare that an entire kingdom is now no longer Arian and is Christian.
Right.
Right, like this is a weird idea, and like they knew that this was not something that just like goes down, like you can't actually just flip a switch, right? So so they wanted to help people to embrace this thing. So it's this like deep movement of love, you
Right.
know, that's
And this isn't,
that's
and let's be clear, people are going to their Aryan churches and things like this, and they're basically trying to roll this out and explain to them in that setting. This isn't like they're like, going into villages and burning down their houses and saying, no, you have to believe this now. It really is this act of love that you're talking about, where it's like, hey, glad you're here on Sunday. Just, we should probably clarify, like, this is what we believe, and maybe you didn't know this
yeah.
before, maybe it wasn't super clear. We're going to be doing a couple of things over the next couple of months to make this super clear, including like carving it into this pillar, just so that you guys know about that. And it feels very modern,
No,
sort of
exactly.
parish
Like,
council, but it is, I just want to specify, because so often when we talk, about Christianity flipping that switch, quote unquote, from something to now Christianity, that can be sort of framed in this History Channel sort of a way as like, oh, mean Christians come in and colonize the people and force them. And look, I mean, I'm not going to deny that sometimes, unfortunately, tragically, that did happen, but this is not one of those cases.
as far as I know, yeah, right. I mean, this is just how religious decisions are made for centuries and centuries and centuries. I mean, thousands of years in human history, which is that like, the king makes decisions, and like generally makes decisions for the whole, for everyone under his authority, right?
Right.
And there is a certain sense of what governance is, like, right, this is neither a democracy nor a 20th century autocracy,
Mm-hmm.
like it's kingship is this like very interesting network of relationships and dependencies and all these kinds of things, and it's a much more complicated system there. So there is this thing that like the king has made this decision. It's strictly speaking paternalistic, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The concept is that the one who knows better, has made this decision, and then those who don't know better, and who depend on him in various ways, will follow the decision that he has made. which is okay, fine. I mean, like, let's not kid ourselves that we are so much more independent than that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if it's
like,
not that, if it's not that, it's something else. But no, I mean, I'm really enjoying this conversation because in a weird way, I mean, this is by far, I think, the most sort of hushed tones religious conversation we've had on the podcast. But you know, we have to tie in some history there and things. But ultimately, we are talking about our own spiritual experiences of this place and of this God we believe in this place. I want to bring it down for all you kids out there. I want to bring it down for a second though, and connect on part of it that we haven't connected it quite as much on, because I always just sort of describe this podcast as an intersection between, you know, faith and then psychology and how those things manifest in the arts. Right. And I mean, primarily it's an arts podcast, but the faith and the psychology piece, just because of who we are, is always going to play into that. And we've talked a lot about the psychology, you know, being a part of the narrative, being a part of the story, being a part of the building, carrying on the tradition. We've talked now a lot about the faith stuff, and I want to pull it into the arts thing by way of this pillar that you're talking about, because I think oftentimes, you know, artists, capital A, or anyone who creates or is creative, can have this very sort of weird, false humility. I would say a satanic off-brand version of humility that says, like, this thing that I'm creating isn't that great. It doesn't matter. Like, if I was creating, you know, this other thing over there, that'd be cool, but I'm just creating this thing, and this thing kind of sucks. And I think it's so profound that you're, from an arts perspective, that you're talking about a pillar here being that important, being the only thing that survives the original edifice and becomes part of the permanent space that we can still celebrate, and now becomes symbolic and representative of all of these different, you know, mixed feelings and different experiences of faith from different sides of a religious aisle, many different religious aisles, becomes this thing that outlasts. And I just would be so moved, and I hope this doesn't sound silly to say this, but I would just be so moved to see the face of the stonemason who was making this.
Sure.
If he could just know that that's what his pillar would mean someday.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you know, you have a really important point, you know, because, like, I mean, look, think about it. It's a little bit harder a question in Spain. It's but, you know, in all likelihood, at least many other places in Western Europe at that time period, you know, these things would have been the church itself, from, say, you know, the early 7th century, would have been covered from head to toe in images. Covered. I mean, like, every surface.
Mm-hmm.
Every surface, you know, would be painted, have images and, you know, stories and everything.
Yeah,
everything.
The past is a hell of a lot more colorful than our movies give it credit for.
Yeah, exactly. And, like,
physically,
and all this religious imagery, and, like, and imagine, like, if you were a person who was praying in St. Mary's Cathedral, like, when, you know, Isidore Seville is alive or whatever, which is, he dies in 636, or whatever, you know, you would never notice this pillar. This pillar is not the thing that would catch your attention. Like, what would catch your attention would be, like, all of the, probably, Spain had a little bit of a history of not having images in churches, but that was back in the 4th century. You know, you would be seeing, like, it would be all these images, the dozens and dozens and dozens of images all over the church. That would be what you would remember. I mean, it would be like my experience of, you know, freezing and, like, actually making myself think through and pray through these, like, dozens of beautiful images on the outside wall alone, you know? Like, that's the stuff that you would remember. That's the stuff that would have been celebrated. Like, you know, if people had been exchanging tourist pilgrim notes about, like, the Toledo Cathedral in, like, 650, they would have been talking about, like, the relics and the paintings and all of these things. Like, literally nobody ever would have mentioned this pillar.
That's, yeah.
But the fact
and that's
is
exactly it.
That, like, this is it. You know, this is it. Like, that building is gone. A mosque was built on top of it. That mosque is gone. Like, this gigantic Gothic cathedral was built specifically with the size and shape that it has, so that it, in the early 13th century, like the 1220s, so that it would cover up every spot where the mosque had been with the church. And all of the kinds of things. So there are multiple layers of that we know about. I mean, there may be more that we don't know about. There are multiple layers that we know about and are really well documented. Of, like, you know, construction and destruction, reception and rejection, all this kind of stuff. And, like, this is the thing that survived, you know? And I think it's all of that together that was, for me, this very profoundly, like, contemplative moment of really feeling like the history of the Christian people, in all of its beauty and all of its struggle, like, collapse in on me, like that like it's sort of in and out, like accordioning in and out, like over and around me, like at every, like, breath, you know. And I think it's because of the kind of incongruity of it, but it also at the same time isn't just like literally a random, like, construction pillar. It's a commemorative monument that from its beginning was an act of memory, you know, like a declaration of ownership of the space, a consecration of it to God under the patronage of the Virgin Mary. And this, you know, it was an act of memory that, like, we will remember, like, we commit our hearts to remembering what happened on this day. And what the amazing thing is just that, like, they didn't realize it meant everything they thought it meant. And it meant so much dramatically more than anybody who was there that day ever would have known.
And I think, you know, the thing that's been sort of ringing in my head the whole time you've been speaking, and I have been hesitant to bring it up because I didn't want to turn this conversation into this, but it's sort of gone that way, and I'm glad it has. Anyway, so I'm going to throw this out there. You know, when you started talking about walking into that space and having all this stuff crash over you, what popped into my head is all these different atheist and agnostic comedians I watch that will do bits, and they're often very sincere bits. They're often sort of the sincere interlude in the middle of a stand-up act where they talk about how small they are in the cosmos and how that's beautiful to them. And that why isn't, you know, Tim Minchin in particular, Australian musical comedian genius, does a whole bit about, like, why isn't that enough for you? Like, why do you need there to be, you know, gods and all these other things? Like, I am a blip in creation. I'm a grain of sand in the universe, and the cosmos is rising and falling around me, and, you know, the stars are moving past me, and, you know, I get to see this for a second, and then I die. And why isn't that enough for you? And I think there's some truth to that, right? There's a grain of truth, of humility to that. But what I think is the positive, and I would argue psychologically healthy, but certainly more Catholic response to that is I think what you experienced there, and to a lesser degree what I experienced there, because it's this feeling of, especially when we talk about the artist making that pillar, and I want to say this to any artist or creative person listening, like, the humility doesn't come from saying, oh, I'm not a big deal. The humility comes from saying, who the hell are you to think you're not a big deal? You know, who the hell are you to think you're not a big deal, who just happens to be part of a way, way, way bigger deal? You know, that pillar is a big deal. That guy could not have known, that mason could not have known how big of a deal his masonry was. It was a big deal precisely because it was a small part of a much bigger deal. The bigger deal didn't make the small deal smaller by comparison. The bigger deal imbued the smaller deal with its bigness, and it still is sort of resplendent with its bigness all these centuries later. And anything I make, anything I create is the same way, and I am the same way. I am not a small deal In comparison with the bigness of the big deal, I am a big deal because the big deal gives me its bigness and I'm a part of it. And I am that pillar. And anything I make is that pillar. And any artist listening to this, whether it's, the beautiful statue that you're carving right now, or whether it's the crayon drawing you're hanging on your mommy's fridge, is a big frickin' deal. And I'm just I'm going to sit with this for like a long time, I think, because your retreat has sort of percolated and become, I'm catching the wake off the edge of your retreat now, because God, there's no way to land this plane now that I can think of. I'm just really moved by that idea.
Yeah. I'm really with you that this is where any emphasis on the smallness of the person, the smallness of the individual contributions, all that kind of stuff, for a Christian, it's necessarily always re-echoing with this word of Christ in the gospel, right? That two sparrows are sold for a coin in the market, and are you not worth more than many sparrows? That that every hair on your head is counted, all of these things, that this is not just a kind of like pious nothing that you put on like a pillow or whatever, but
right.
It's
exactly wine o'clock somewhere.
Hello. that there is this, that because we are in the image of God, and we have this vocation of God likeness, of becoming like God by His grace, that what is proposed to our embrace has an infinite dignity, like the way in which we are proposed to spend our lives has an infinite dignity, and we share in that as a gift, because of the nature that we've been given, and then because of the life of grace, for those of us who struggle to live with Jesus Christ, to respond to this invitation, to live by that infinite dignity. And I just think that that's such an important point, that again, think about the Mason thing. Which is such a helpful reflection. Think about this guy. We literally know nothing about him. We don't know whether it was one guy or a couple of guys. We don't know anything. What language he spoke, what his name was, anything. What else he did. Maybe he had other things that he was really proud of. And this was just some garbage thing that he didn't think was important. Or, maybe like the guy who carved the inscription, he thought was a jerk, and he thought that he really botched the whole thing up, and that he messed up the symmetry of his pillar or whatever, but the point is that,
he used Visigothian MT bold instead of Visigothian MT italic.
What if he used Visigothic papyrus, bro? That's, it gets dark, Visigothic Comic Sans. Oh my gosh. That's actually why you can't read anybody who just came in and scrubbed it all off. They're like, this is so embarrassing.
We're translating to Latin and then deleting it.
And then deleting it so that nobody can remember how bad our taste was in Spain in the 580s. But that's it. That this person created, and what they created had a certain share in the creator's dignity, the dignity of being a human. And that means it has a potential that just goes, it has a dignity and a potential that just goes. And behold, in this wild and incredible and beautiful way, over the course of the next almost 1,500 years, it has continued to have this humble but real glory.
Yeah. I can't think of a better way to close this out than that. I'm going to be sitting with that forever. So why don't you land this plane, buddy?
Yeah, let's, So listen, everybody, I just got to tell you, if you happen to find yourself a $300 ticket, go to Spain, go to Toledo, buy yourself a Game of Thrones personalized dagger set, eat some manchego, spend as much time as you can possibly spend in the Toledo Cathedral, being freezing cold, and in any case, go forth and create cool things.
This has been Created Things, an Art, Soul, and Mind production with Jacob Flores Popchak and Father Gabriel Toretta. Production by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on the podcast and on its hosts, visit artsoulandmind.com.